Imagine moving into what you thought was your forever home, only to realize you'd just stepped onto a battlefield where the enemy wasn't insurgents or foreign threats. It was your HOA president, armed with a clipboard and a fake smile. That's exactly what happened to my family and me. After years of bouncing between military bases, deployments, and rentals that never felt truly ours, we finally had a chance at the American dream, a home to call our own. We found it in a beautiful colonial tucked away in what looked like the perfect suburban neighborhood. Tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, kids riding bikes, and neighbors waving from their driveways. It was everything we wanted for our son Tyler, who had spent his whole life packing up every couple of years and calling somewhere else home. But the real selling point wasn't the white columns or the quiet cul-de-sac. It was the oak tree. This massive 100-year-old giant dominated the backyard, its branches sprawling protectively over the lawn like a living monument. Amanda, my wife, fell in love with it instantly. I pictured Tyler climbing it, building tree houses, swinging from a rope tied to the thickest branch. That oak tree meant roots, stability, the kind of childhood we both dreamed of giving him. So we signed the papers, moved in, and thought the hardest part was behind us. We had no idea the real fight hadn't even begun yet. We barely had time to unpack before the first sign of trouble showed up on our doorstep. It was 3 days after moving day, and we were still knee-deep in cardboard boxes and missing half our silverware. The doorbell rang, and standing there was Victoria Hamilton. She looked like she walked straight out of a luxury car commercial. Perfectly tailored pantsuit, platinum blonde bob not a hair out of place, holding a wicker basket stuffed with coupons and a laminated copy of the HOA guidelines. Her smile was so wide and polished, it was almost a threat. "Welcome to Oak Ridge Estates," she chirped, her voice just a little too high, a little too tight. She handed me the basket, but her eyes weren't on me. They were already scanning over my shoulder, taking inventory of the moving boxes on the porch, Tyler's bike lying in the grass, the temporary chaos of a family setting down roots. That smile tightened even further as she politely, but oh so firmly, informed us she just wanted to personally welcome us and ensure we understood the community standards. What followed wasn't a neighborly welcome, it was an inspection. She rattled off rules about the height of our grass, the acceptable paint colors for fences, the precise mailbox design specifications, and then she zeroed in on the oak tree. "Most homeowners prefer a more manicured aesthetic," she said, glancing through the open back door to where the great oak stood, proud and defiant. "You might consider having it removed to better align with our standards." That was when I felt it. The same cold stiffness in my spine I used to get standing at attention, receiving an unreasonable order from a superior. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "The oak stays." Her eyes flickered, just for a second, with something cold and calculating, before the fake smile snapped back into place. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "we'll see. Our community takes appearance very seriously. I'm sure you'll want to be a good neighbor." As she turned and walked away, Amanda caught my eye from across the room. Years in military intelligence had trained her to read people in an instant. She gave me a look that said it all. This wasn't a friendly welcome. It was a warning shot. The warning shots kept coming, subtle at first but relentless. It started with a letter in the mailbox, a polite but stern notice citing a violation. Our grass was too long. I blinked at the fine, $50 for grass that was allegedly half an inch taller than regulation. Mind you, I'd mowed just 2 days earlier. The lawn looked immaculate. I thought it had to be some mistake, a clerical error, but Amanda wasn't so sure. "This is the first move," she said as she flipped through the HOA guidelines, highlighting vague language about community aesthetics. Sure enough, 3 days later, another letter arrived. this time claiming our garbage bins had been visible from the street for 4 minutes past the allowable collection window. 4 minutes. Another $50 fine. Tyler's basketball hoop, which was neatly tucked against our garage, suddenly became a violation too, because it was visible from the street. Every day felt like another petty attack, another ridiculous fine, another way to bleed us dry. This wasn't about rules. It wasn't about keeping the neighborhood nice. It was about control. Amanda saw it immediately. She pulled out her old military notebook, the one she used for mission planning, and started sketching diagrams of our property, timelines of the violations, references to city ordinances that superseded HOA rules. "Know your battlefield. Know your enemy," she muttered, as she mapped out our response. Meanwhile, I couldn't help feeling the frustration building inside me like a pressure cooker. I'd fought through deployments, bureaucracy, and battlefields overseas. I never imagined the toughest fight would be against a blonde suburban dictator with a vendetta against an oak tree. And if Victoria thought we'd be easy targets, she was about to learn the hard way. We weren't just any family. We were a military family. And we don't back down. At first, it was easy to write it off as paranoia. The black SUV parked across the street late at night. The slow passes in front of our house, headlights dimmed, lingering a little too long to be casual. Maybe it was just coincidence, just a cautious neighbor keeping an eye on things. That's what I told myself the first night, and the second. By the third night, Amanda had already shifted into full security mode, watching through the blinds, documenting times and license plates, tracking the pattern. This wasn't coincidence. It was surveillance. And it didn't take long to figure out who was behind it. Walter Brooks, the ex-cop on the HOA board with a reputation for being Victoria's enforcer. The man had all the subtlety of a hammer, sitting there for hours with a telephoto lens pointed straight at our house, like he was gathering evidence for a crime we hadn't committed. I watched him once from the upstairs window, while Amanda quietly installed high-resolution security cameras all around the perimeter. "If they want to watch us," she said under her breath, "then we'll watch them back, with better optics." She wasn't joking. Within 24 hours, our house had better surveillance coverage than most convenience stores. Every driveway angle, every backyard corner, every inch of property was monitored and recorded. Amanda didn't miss a single detail. And still, Walter came. It escalated beyond just sitting and watching. He started creeping closer, taking pictures, slowing his SUV to a crawl whenever Tyler played basketball out front, making no effort to hide his presence anymore. It was intimidation, plain and simple. But they picked the wrong family to intimidate. Amanda gathered every bit of footage, time-stamped, logged, and catalogued. She cross-referenced HOA bylaws with city ordinances, highlighting every place where Walter's harassment overstepped legal boundaries. "They're building a case against themselves," she said calmly one night, as we reviewed the footage of Walter parked across the street at 2 a.m., his camera flashing against the darkness. "They just don't realize it yet." What we realized, thanks to some very cautious conversations with a few neighbors who still had spines left, was that this wasn't the first time Victoria and Walter had pulled this routine. They had a pattern. It was quiet at first, isolated. They picked one family at a time, targeted them with fines, harassment, thinly veiled threats until they either complied or cracked and sold their homes at a loss. Nobody fought back. Nobody stayed long enough to organize resistance. Victoria controlled everything: the HOA board, the meeting minutes, the interpretation of the rules, even the social events where neighbors were supposed to bond. It was all about control. But she had underestimated how stubborn, how methodical, and how downright dangerous two military veterans could be when backed into a corner. Daniel Foster became one of our first open allies. Over beers on his back deck, he explained how Victoria had shifted the neighborhood culture the moment her husband died, and she took over the board. It wasn't about safety or aesthetics anymore. It was about personal power and real estate. Daniel revealed something that put everything in focus. There was a developer, Pinnacle Development Group, looking to expand commercial properties right behind our community. The problem? A handful of heritage oak trees, and the families that refused to cut them down, stood in the way of rezoning approvals. The HOA, led by Victoria, was clearing the path. We weren't just an eyesore to her neat suburban vision. We were an obstacle to a big payday. And the oak tree in our backyard. It wasn't just a tree anymore. It was a battleground. Still, nothing could have prepared us for how desperate they were about to get. It was a Thursday night. Tyler was upstairs doing homework. Amanda was reviewing documents, and I was finally starting to believe maybe the worst of it had passed. Then the doorbell rang. 2 men stood outside. Serious expressions, pressed uniforms, county sheriff's badges glinting under the porch light. For a second, my stomach dropped. Had they really escalated this far? Amanda answered the door, the security chain still latched, and asked for ID. They flashed it too quickly, but they claimed to have an eviction notice in hand, tied to multiple safety violations. My instincts screamed that something was wrong. Amanda kept her cool, politely asking for a closer look at the paperwork. The paper looked real at a glance, county letterhead, official stamps. But there were errors, subtle ones. The county name was misspelled in the header. The signature didn't match the judge who had overseen our last HOA dispute. And the way these 2 men carried themselves, too rigid, too nervous, was all wrong. Amanda, ever the professional, nodded calmly, stalled them with small talk, and texted a real deputy she knew from the base's law enforcement division. Reinforcements were on the way, but Amanda wasn't about to let things escalate. She asked the officers for their badge numbers again. They got flustered. They tried to insist that refusing a legal inspection was a crime. One of them even put his hand on his holstered weapon in a pathetic attempt at intimidation. That was it. Amanda pulled out her Naval Base Security Commander credentials, held them up to the door chain, and said, in a voice that could have frozen lava, "Gentlemen, you are currently impersonating federal law enforcement officers. That's a felony. My colleague from the actual sheriff's department is on her way. You have about 30 seconds to decide if you want to add resisting arrest to your list of charges." Watching the blood drain from their faces through the peephole would have been hilarious if it hadn't been so serious. One of them, the shorter one, immediately cracked. "We were just hired to deliver the notice," he blurted out, panic in his voice. "Brooks said you'd back down if you thought it was real." The other one tried to shut him up, but it was too late. The truth was out. They weren't cops. They weren't even real security. They were thugs, hired by Walter Brooks to scare us off. Just then, real patrol cars rolled up with lights flashing. Within minutes, the fake cops were handcuffed and being read their rights, sitting on the curb looking miserable, while Tyler peeked wide-eyed through the upstairs window. Amanda wasted no time. She sent the body cam footage, our security recordings, and everything we had to her chain of command. By morning, the situation had escalated from a local harassment issue to an active federal investigation. Impersonating police officers wasn't just a desperate HOA stunt. It was serious enough to involve the NCIS, local law enforcement, and possibly the FBI. What had started as a petty HOA turf war had turned into a full-blown criminal case. And Victoria Hamilton. She had no idea the storm that was about to hit her. By the time morning came after the fake cop stunt, we knew something in the air had shifted. It wasn't just about fines and intimidation anymore. Victoria and her little empire had officially crossed the line into criminal territory. And Amanda and I knew better than anyone what that meant. It meant the gloves were coming off. We weren't defending ourselves anymore. We were going on the offensive. As soon as the sun came up, Amanda called a meeting at our dining room table, which now looked more like a war room. Maps of the neighborhood, printouts of HOA financial records, copies of city ordinances, photos of Walter's SUV parked illegally across from our home, night after night, and the final nail, signed confessions from the two fake cops, stating they were hired directly by Walter Brooks to impersonate law enforcement, intimidate us, and serve fake eviction paperwork. Amanda handled the law enforcement and military reporting, coordinating with the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, while I worked with Daniel Foster, digging through the HOA's procedural violations and financial mismanagement. It didn't take long for a clearer picture to emerge. This wasn't just personal harassment against us. Victoria had turned the HOA into a weapon to clear out families who stood in the way of her secret side deal with Pinnacle Development. And with every document we uncovered, every ally we pulled into the fold, her empire started to crumble, piece by piece. We weren't alone anymore. Word spread through the neighborhood about what had happened: the fake police, the arrests, the investigation. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down now started quietly reaching out to us. Some had their own stories. Stories about mysteriously punitive fines after refusing to sell their homes. Stories about anonymous complaints that only started after they rejected Victoria's advice to consider relocating. Stories that matched exactly what we were uncovering on paper. Nancy Sullivan, the HOA secretary, showed up at our house one evening with a manila envelope clutched to her chest, visibly trembling. Inside were emails and meeting notes, proving that Victoria had authorized payments to Walter under the table, bypassing the HOA board's knowledge. Payments for security consultations and enforcement actions. She looked me in the eyes and said, "I can't be part of this anymore. I should have come forward sooner." I told her the same thing Amanda always said in situations like these. The right time to do the right thing is always now. With her evidence, we had a smoking gun. And just when we thought it couldn't get any better, Mark Reynolds, an investigative reporter from the regional newspaper, contacted us. Through one of the deputies handling the Walter Brooks arrest, Mark had heard about the situation and realized it connected to something he'd been digging into for over a year. Suspicious property seizures, rushed zoning changes, and shady developers buying land at below-market rates. He told us flat out, "You're the missing piece." For the first time in months, it felt like momentum was on our side. But Victoria wasn't going down without a fight. 3 days later, a notice was shoved into every mailbox in the community, announcing an emergency HOA meeting. The agenda was simple and ominous: presentation of conclusive evidence regarding the Blackwell property violations and vote to authorize legal action. In other words, Victoria was trying to rally the neighborhood to vote us out before the criminal investigation could bring her down. She was desperate to control the story, to paint us as the villains causing chaos, instead of the victims uncovering her corruption. Amanda saw it instantly for what it was: a last-ditch attempt to isolate us and silence the growing rebellion. But what Victoria didn't realize was that we were prepared for exactly this moment. The night before the meeting, Amanda and I stayed up late finalizing our strategy. We printed dozens of copies of key documents: Nancy's emails, the financial irregularities, the city regulations protecting heritage trees, sworn statements from the fake cops, evidence of the fraudulent arborist report Victoria had used to get her new fake court order against our oak tree. We coordinated with Officer Tiffany Wells, who agreed to attend the meeting in her official uniform to confirm the ongoing criminal investigation publicly. Mark Reynolds would be there too, notebook in hand, preparing his front-page exposé. And just to add more weight, Amanda pulled a few strings and arranged for an FBI agent, specializing in public corruption, to quietly attend the meeting as an observer. It wasn't just about clearing our names anymore. It was about tearing down the entire rotten system Victoria had built. When we arrived at the clubhouse the next evening, it was packed, standing room only. Every neighbor, every homeowner who had ever silently wondered why the rules seemed to change, depending on who you were, was there. Victoria sat at the head table, surrounded by her loyalists, with her smug expression firmly in place, acting as if everything was under control. Her hired gun, lawyer Ryan Harrison, was there too, flipping through thick stacks of documents, prepared to steamroll anyone who dared question their authority. Victoria opened the meeting without even acknowledging the elephant in the room. She droned on about protecting community standards and dangerous violations on our property, dramatically waving around a copy of the new court order she had somehow managed to secure, thanks to the fake arborist report. Harrison jumped up, presenting heavily doctored photos of our house, cropped at angles to make our pristine lawn look neglected, highlighting the oak tree with red circles and ominous arrows, like it was some kind of monster. He talked about fines, about safety risks, about the legal requirement to comply with the new inspection order. His voice dripped with smug superiority as he warned that refusing to comply with the court order could result in immediate contempt charges. Some of the neighbors looked uncomfortable, others simply confused. Victoria sat back, smiling like a queen about to issue her final decree. Then Amanda stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't shout. She simply began, calmly and methodically dismantling every accusation with cold, hard evidence. First, she addressed the so-called arborist report. She showed the official state records proving that Martin Consulting, the company who allegedly authored the report, had dissolved a year and a half ago. She displayed sworn affidavits from licensed arborists confirming no legitimate inspection had ever been performed. Next, she exposed the payments to Walter Brooks, showing how Victoria had funneled HOA funds for personal vendettas under the guise of security expenses. Then came the surveillance footage of Walter trespassing on private property, the fake police incident, the arrests, signed confessions. Officer Tiffany Wells stepped forward in uniform to confirm that yes, there was an active criminal investigation into Walter Brooks, and that further charges were pending against anyone found to have conspired in his actions. The room, once filled with murmured conversations, was now dead silent. Homeowners stared at Victoria with wide, betrayed eyes. Still, Victoria tried to regain control. She stammered about misunderstandings and overzealous enforcement, desperately trying to spin the narrative. But it was too late. Mark Reynolds, from the back of the room, stood up and coolly announced that his paper would be publishing a full exposé the next morning, including financial documents, witness statements, and evidence linking Victoria and Pinnacle Development Group directly to corrupt zoning changes. As if that weren't enough, the FBI agent quietly introduced himself and confirmed an ongoing federal review of Pinnacle's activities across multiple neighborhoods. Victoria's mask cracked. For the first time since we had met her, she looked genuinely afraid. As the HOA meeting descended into chaos, the truth spread through the room like wildfire. Neighbors who had once nodded politely at Victoria's every word were now standing up, one after another, recounting their own experiences with her regime of intimidation. People talked about fines they had paid, without ever receiving warnings, about anonymous complaints that seemed to materialize out of nowhere if you so much as questioned the board, about how quickly life could become miserable if you didn't bow to Victoria's version of order. One man, Mr. Collins, an older veteran himself, stood with trembling hands and described how he had been fined nearly $2,000 over landscaping violations because his wheelchair ramp had a flower pot at the wrong angle. It wasn't enforcement, it was punishment. Punishment for not fitting the image she wanted to project. In that moment, the neighborhood realized this wasn't a fluke. It wasn't us stirring up drama. It was a systemic pattern of abuse, years in the making, and we had finally torn the curtain down. Daniel Foster, the law professor, moved quickly. He stood, holding the HOA's own bylaws in his hand, and called for an immediate vote of no confidence. His voice didn't waver. According to Section 4.7 of the Oak Ridge Estates Charter, if evidence of malfeasance by board leadership is presented to the general body, homeowners may motion for a vote of emergency removal. He didn't even finish the sentence before 3 other hands shot up to second the motion. Victoria tried to protest. She tried to shout over him, to claim the meeting was out of order, that none of this was valid, but no one was listening anymore. The vote was called. One by one, homeowners raised their hands. 38 votes in favor of removal, 3 against, Victoria's last crumbling loyalists. The look on her face wasn't anger anymore. It was panic. Officer Wells stepped forward and announced that Victoria was being formally detained for questioning in the ongoing investigation into misuse of funds and conspiracy to commit fraud. She wasn't under arrest yet, but everyone knew it was coming. Victoria was escorted out of the room without ceremony, clutching her designer handbag like it was a life raft in a sinking ship. Her lawyer, Harrison, slipped away quietly, muttering something about needing to consult with counsel. The meeting wasn't over, though. Not even close. The neighbors, energized and furious now, unanimously voted to install Daniel as interim HOA president, pending a full audit and reformation of the entire association. The power Victoria had clung to for years evaporated in a matter of minutes, and in its place grew something we hadn't felt since moving into the neighborhood: hope. In the days that followed, everything changed. Our oak tree, the symbol of this entire battle, was officially declared a protected heritage tree by unanimous board vote. No more fake arborist reports. No more phony safety violations. That towering giant that had watched generations of families grow and thrive would remain, its roots dug deep into the earth just like our family's roots now were. Pinnacle Development Group's shady expansion plans were halted, pending a full investigation, and Councilman Matthews, the official who had signed off on suspicious rezoning changes, resigned under federal investigation. Victoria faced multiple felony charges, including conspiracy, fraud, and misuse of HOA funds. Walter Brooks, cornered by overwhelming evidence, took a plea deal and rolled over on her, providing even more damning testimony in exchange for reduced charges. The empire she had built on fear and manipulation collapsed into rubble almost overnight. But what mattered most wasn't just the victories in courtrooms or on paper. It was what happened next, on a simple sunny Saturday afternoon, underneath the branches of that old oak tree. We hosted a neighborhood barbecue, not the forced, awkward kind Victoria used to organize with plastic smiles and whispered gossip, but a real one. Kids ran around barefoot, chasing each other with water guns. Families who had once kept their heads down now laughed openly, sharing stories of resilience and relief. Neighbors who barely knew each other before now stood shoulder to shoulder, grilling burgers and passing around lemonade. Tyler stood proudly with a group of his new friends, announcing the formation of a nature club that would meet under the oak to protect the tree and learn about the environment. It was the kind of community we had dreamed of when we first saw this house. It had taken a battle to get here, but what had grown from the struggle was stronger than anything Victoria had tried to build through fear. I stood back, holding a drink in my hand, watching it all unfold. Amanda came up beside me, slipping her hand into mine, both of us staring up at that sprawling canopy above. The sunlight filtered through the leaves in soft green waves, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything. Finally, I turned to her and asked, "Do you ever wish we'd just picked a house somewhere else?" "Somewhere easy." She smiled. That small, knowing smile she used when she wanted to say something important without making a big deal out of it. "Easy never lasts," she said. "The things worth having, the things worth fighting for, They never come easy. That oak tree, this home, Tyler's future, they're worth every bit of it. She squeezed my hand and added, "Besides, they picked the wrong family to mess with." The sun began to set behind the houses, casting long golden shadows over the street, and I realized how true her words were. This wasn't just about winning a fight. It was about standing firm for what mattered, about protecting what you love, about refusing to be pushed out by bullies and corruption, no matter how powerful they think they are. And as the sky turned pink and the light strung between the trees started to glow, I raised my glass to the gathering around us, to this newly rebuilt community, and said simply, to real neighbors, to standing together. Glasses clinked in the warm evening air. Laughter echoed beneath the oak's sprawling branches, and for the first time since we moved in, it truly felt like home.